Imagine opening your kitchen cupboard and finding almost nothing inside. No fresh meat. No expensive desserts. Not even enough ingredients for the meals your family loved. That was the heartbreaking reality for millions of American families during the Great Depression. But instead of giving up, they did something remarkable. They transformed the simplest, cheapest ingredients into meals that kept hope alive around the dinner table. Some of these dishes were so clever that they fooled people into thinking they were eating foods families could no longer afford. Others were born from pure desperation, using ingredients that most of us would never imagine putting together today. Yet these forgotten recipes filled empty stomachs, stretched every last penny, and became unforgettable symbols of survival. Today, most of these Depression-era foods have completely vanished from American family tables. Younger generations have never tasted them, and many have never even heard their names. But behind every recipe is a powerful story of resilience, sacrifice, and the determination to keep loved ones fed during one of the darkest chapters in American history. So, before these remarkable meals disappear from memory forever, let us step back in time and rediscover 15 Depression-era foods that once fed a nation, but have now almost completely vanished. Hoover stew. When the stock market crashed in 1929, millions of Americans lost far more than money. Jobs disappeared, savings vanished, and dinner tables that once held hearty meals suddenly looked painfully empty. Out of that hardship came one of the Great Depression's most recognizable survival dishes, Hoover stew. Named after President Herbert Hoover, whom many blamed for the economic collapse, this humble meal became a symbol of difficult times. There was no single recipe because every family used whatever they could afford. Most versions combined macaroni, canned tomatoes, beans, hot dogs, onions, or leftover meat. If something edible remained in the pantry, it usually found its way into the pot. Nothing was wasted. Every ingredient stretched the meal a little further, allowing one pot to feed an entire household. Hoover stew was especially common in relief camps and struggling neighborhoods, where families depended on inexpensive foods to survive another day. Community kitchens and church organizations often prepared enormous batches, ensuring that as many people as possible received a warm meal. It was simple, filling, and inexpensive, even if it lacked the rich flavors people had once enjoyed. For many children, the smell of Hoover stew simmering on the stove meant there would at least be something to eat that evening. It was not a meal anyone proudly served to guests, but it represented determination and hope during one of America's darkest decades. As prosperity slowly returned after World War II, families eagerly embraced fresh ingredients and more flavorful recipes. Hoover stew quietly disappeared from most kitchens, becoming a memory shared mostly by those who had lived through the Depression. Today, it remains a powerful reminder that resilience is sometimes found in the simplest pot of food imaginable. Mock apple pie. At first glance, it looked like an ordinary homemade apple pie. The golden crust, the warm scent of cinnamon, and the sweet filling convinced many people they were about to enjoy a traditional American dessert. The surprising truth, however, was that there were no apples inside at all. During the Great Depression, fresh fruit was often too expensive for struggling families. Apples, a staple of countless American desserts, became a luxury that many households simply could not afford. Rather than giving up a beloved treat, resourceful home cooks found an ingenious substitute hiding in their pantry: Ritz crackers. When soaked in a mixture of sugar, lemon juice, cinnamon, butter, and water, the crackers softened and took on a texture remarkably similar to cooked apples. Once baked inside a flaky pie crust, the illusion was convincing enough that many people could hardly tell the difference. The recipe became so popular that Nabisco eventually printed it on Ritz cracker boxes, helping it spread to kitchens across the country. Mock apple pie represented far more than a clever dessert. It reflected the determination of families who refused to let financial hardships steal comforting traditions. Mothers could still place a pie on the table for birthdays, Sunday dinners, or holiday gatherings, even when real apples were beyond their budget. As the American economy recovered and fresh produce became affordable again, most families happily returned to making genuine apple pies. The cracker versions slowly faded into history, remembered mainly by grandparents who had lived through those difficult years. Today, Mock apple pie remains one of the most fascinating examples of Depression-era creativity. It reminds us that sometimes the greatest recipes were not born from abundance, but from necessity, proving that hope could be baked into a pie even when one of its most important ingredients was missing. Cornmeal mush. Long before sugary cereals and frozen breakfast sandwiches filled American kitchens, countless families began their mornings with a humble bowl of cornmeal mush. During the Great Depression, it became one of the most dependable breakfasts because it was inexpensive, filling, and made from ingredients nearly every household could afford. The recipe was wonderfully simple. Cornmeal was slowly stirred into boiling water with a pinch of salt until it thickened into a creamy porridge. Families who had a little extra might add milk, butter, or a drizzle of maple syrup. Others enjoyed it with molasses, while some waited for leftovers to cool overnight before slicing them into thick pieces and frying them until golden brown the next morning. Cornmeal mush was especially popular across the Midwest, where corn was plentiful and affordable. Farmers had relied on similar dishes for generations, but during the Depression it became a lifeline for families trying to stretch every dollar. A single bag of cornmeal could provide breakfast after breakfast, helping parents keep hungry children satisfied without spending precious money on expensive foods. Although it lacked the excitement of bacon and eggs, cornmeal mush delivered warmth and comfort on cold mornings. For many children, it was the familiar meal waiting on the stove before school, while adults depended on it for the energy needed to face another long day of searching for work or tending small farms. As prosperity returned after the 1940s, breakfast habits gradually changed. Boxed cereals, pancakes, and more elaborate morning meals became common, pushing cornmeal mush into the background. Today, it survives mostly through family traditions and regional recipes, quietly reminding us that one of America's simplest breakfasts once helped countless families begin each difficult day with hope, determination, and enough nourishment to keep going. Dandelion salad. Most people see dandelions as nothing more than stubborn weeds invading their lawns. During the Great Depression, however, these bright yellow plants became something entirely different. For thousands of struggling American families, they were a free source of fresh food growing just beyond the front door. When grocery money was scarce, people learned to gather young dandelion leaves from fields, gardens, and roadsides away from traffic. The tender greens were carefully washed to remove their natural bitterness before being tossed with simple ingredients like vinegar, bacon grease, onions, or a splash of lemon juice if the family happened to have one. Some households even added hard-boiled eggs or bits of leftover bacon when fortune allowed. Dandelion salad was more than a meal. It represented the resourcefulness that defined an entire generation. Families understood that nature could provide valuable nutrition when store shelves offered little they could afford. Rich in vitamins A and C, the leafy greens helped supplement diets that often lacked fresh vegetables during those difficult years. Children were sometimes sent into nearby fields with baskets, turning an ordinary afternoon into an important family chore. What many considered weeds became an essential ingredient for dinner, proving that survival often depended on seeing value where others saw none. As America recovered economically, supermarkets expanded, and fresh produce became available year-round. Few people felt the need to gather wild greens anymore. Dandelion salad gradually disappeared from everyday family tables, surviving mainly in rural communities and among those who remembered the hardships of the 1930s. Today, this forgotten dish serves as a reminder that resilience sometimes grows in the most unexpected places. A simple weed, overlooked by most people, once helped countless families stay healthy, stretch limited resources, and find hope during one of America's hardest chapters in history. Vinegar pie. Imagine serving a homemade pie that tasted surprisingly similar to lemon custard, even though there were no lemons in the kitchen. That was the remarkable secret behind vinegar pie, one of the most inventive desserts to emerge from the Great Depression. It proved that a little creativity could turn the simplest pantry staples into something that felt worthy of a family celebration. The recipe had much older roots in early American cooking, but it experienced a major revival during the 1930s. Fresh fruit was often unavailable or too expensive, forcing home bakers to improvise with ingredients they almost always had on hand. A mixture of vinegar, sugar, eggs, butter, flour, and spices created a smooth custard filling that developed a bright, tangy flavor once baked. Although unusual on paper, the vinegar mellowed during cooking, leaving behind a taste that reminded many people of citrus. For families counting every penny, vinegar pie became a treasured dessert because it transformed inexpensive ingredients into something comforting and familiar. Mothers could still place a beautiful pie on the table for birthdays, church gatherings, or Sunday dinners without spending precious money on costly fruit. The dessert also reflected an important lesson of the Depression years. Instead of focusing on what was missing, people made the best possible use of what remained. Every successful pie represented determination, optimism, and the belief that difficult times would not last forever. As fresh produce became easier to purchase after the economy recovered, recipes calling for real lemons, berries, and apples once again filled American cookbooks. Vinegar pie slowly slipped into obscurity, remembered mostly in handwritten family recipe collections. Today, this forgotten dessert stands as a delicious reminder that some of history's most memorable recipes were created not from abundance, but from resilience, imagination, and unwavering hope during hardship. Potato pancakes. Few ingredients were as dependable during the Great Depression as the humble potato. It was inexpensive, widely available, and filling enough to satisfy hungry families. Out of this everyday staple came potato pancakes, a simple dish that transformed leftovers into a comforting meal enjoyed from breakfast through supper. The recipe was wonderfully practical. Cooked or grated raw potatoes were mixed with a little flour, an egg if one was available, and a pinch of salt and pepper before being shaped into thin patties and fried until crisp and golden. Families with limited supplies often skipped the egg altogether, relying on the starch from the potatoes to hold everything together. Nothing needed to go to waste, especially when every ingredient had to stretch as far as possible. Potato pancakes also reflected the diverse cultural traditions that shaped American kitchens. Immigrant families from Eastern and Central Europe had prepared similar dishes for generations, and during the Depression those recipes became valuable because they used affordable ingredients while producing hearty, satisfying meals. Some families served the pancakes with applesauce for a touch of sweetness, while others preferred sour cream, onion gravy, or leftover vegetables. Whatever accompanied them depended entirely on what was available that day. Even the smallest additions made an ordinary meal feel special. For children returning home from school, the sound of potato pancakes sizzling in a cast iron skillet often meant there would be enough food for everyone. Their crisp edges and soft centers brought comfort during uncertain times, proving that simple ingredients could create lasting family memories. As prosperity returned and grocery stores offered greater variety, potato pancakes gradually lost their place as an everyday necessity. Today, they remain a beloved tradition in many households, reminding us that one of America's most comforting meals was born not from luxury, but from thrift, determination, and the remarkable ability to make every potato count. Boiled carrot sandwich. A sandwich usually brings to mind slices of ham, turkey, or roast beef tucked between fresh bread. During the Great Depression, however, many American families could not afford those familiar fillings. Instead, they turned to one of the least expected ingredients imaginable, boiled carrots. At first, the idea sounded unusual, but it made perfect sense for families trying to stretch every dollar. Carrots were inexpensive, widely available, and could be grown in backyard gardens. Once peeled and boiled until tender, they developed a natural sweetness that paired surprisingly well with a little butter, mustard, or homemade spread. Some households added onions, leftover cheese, or a pinch of pepper to give the sandwich extra flavor whenever those ingredients were available. The boiled carrot sandwich was never intended to replace fine dining. Its purpose was much simpler. It provided a filling midday meal for workers, school children, and anyone facing another day with limited food. Every slice of bread and every carrot mattered because wasting even the smallest amount was simply not an option. For many mothers, preparing these sandwiches became another example of making the impossible seem possible. They transformed ordinary vegetables into meals that kept their families going while preserving a sense of normal life around the kitchen table. Children might not have realized how carefully each ingredient was being rationed, but parents understood the sacrifice behind every lunch. As America's economy strengthened during the 1940s and supermarkets offered more affordable choices, sandwiches filled with meat, eggs, and fresh produce once again became common. The humble carrot version quietly disappeared from most lunchboxes and family tables. Today, the boiled carrot sandwich is largely forgotten, yet it remains a powerful reminder that even the simplest vegetables could become symbols of resilience, creativity, and hope when families faced extraordinary hardship together. Prune pudding. Today, prunes are often overlooked in grocery stores, but during the Great Depression they became one of America's most dependable ingredients. Affordable, nutritious, and able to last for months without spoiling, dried plums offered struggling families a rare luxury during difficult times. A naturally sweet dessert that did not require expensive fresh fruit. Prune pudding quickly found its place in kitchens across the country. Home cooks combined chopped prunes with flour, breadcrumbs, spices, and whatever sweetener they could afford before steaming or baking the mixture into a rich, moist pudding. A simple sauce made from sugar, syrup, or warm milk was sometimes poured over the top, turning humble ingredients into a comforting family treat. The dessert gained even greater attention because First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt supported economical cooking throughout the 1930s. She encouraged practical meals that reflected the challenges ordinary Americans faced, and recipes featuring inexpensive ingredients, including prunes, often appeared at White House gatherings. While some critics joked about the simple menus, many struggling families appreciated seeing thrift rather than extravagance represented at the nation's highest level. Prune pudding was more than an inexpensive dessert. It reminded people that celebrations did not have to disappear simply because money was scarce. Birthdays, holidays, and Sunday dinners could still end with something sweet, even if it looked far different from the elaborate cakes and pastries enjoyed before the Depression. As prosperity returned and supermarkets filled with fresh fruit, chocolate desserts, and colorful packaged treats, prune pudding slowly faded from everyday American tables. Younger generations came to view prunes as old-fashioned, leaving this once-beloved recipe tucked away in handwritten family cookbooks. Today, prune pudding stands as a forgotten symbol of resilience, proving that even the simplest dried fruit could bring comfort, dignity, and a small taste of happiness during one of America's most challenging eras. Egg drop soup. A single egg may not seem like much today, but during the Great Depression it could transform an ordinary pot of broth into a nourishing meal for an entire family. Egg drop soup became a practical favorite because it required only a handful of inexpensive ingredients while providing warmth, comfort, and valuable nutrition during uncertain times. The preparation was beautifully simple. Water or homemade broth was brought to a gentle simmer before a beaten egg was slowly poured into the pot. As the egg cooked, it formed delicate ribbons that floated through the soup, creating a satisfying texture from very little. Families often added onions, leftover vegetables, stale bread, or bits of chicken if they happened to have them. Every household prepared the soup a little differently, depending on what remained in the pantry. For families determined to waste nothing, even bones from previous meals became valuable. They were simmered for hours to create flavorful broth, ensuring every possible bit of nourishment was used. This careful approach reflected the spirit of the Depression, when stretching ingredients was not simply a good habit but a daily necessity. The soup was especially comforting during cold winters, offering warmth after long hours of searching for work or standing in relief lines. Children appreciated its gentle flavor, while parents valued how quickly it could be prepared without placing additional strain on the family budget. Although egg-based soups had existed in many cultures for centuries, Depression-era American kitchens embraced them for practical reasons rather than culinary tradition. They proved that even the smallest ingredients could make a meaningful difference when resources were limited. As prosperity returned and grocery stores once again offered abundant choices, richer soups gradually replaced this humble favorite. Today, egg drop soup reminds us that one simple egg, carefully used, once represented hope, nourishment, and the determination to feed a family despite overwhelming hardship. Cabbage and noodles. There was a time when a simple bowl of cabbage and noodles could bring an entire family to the dinner table with grateful hearts. During the Great Depression, this humble dish became a dependable favorite because it was inexpensive, filling, and easy to prepare with ingredients that many households already had in their kitchens. The recipe was wonderfully straightforward. Egg noodles or homemade noodles were cooked until tender, while shredded cabbage was slowly sautéed with onions in butter, lard, or whatever cooking fat was available. Once combined, the mixture created a surprisingly comforting meal that was both satisfying and affordable. Some families added black pepper, bits of bacon, or leftover sausage when they were fortunate enough to have them, but many enjoyed the dish just as it was. Cabbage had long been valued for its ability to stay fresh longer than many other vegetables. Combined with inexpensive noodles, it allowed parents to prepare generous portions without placing additional strain on already limited household budgets. For immigrant families, especially those with Eastern European roots, the dish also carried familiar flavors that reminded them of home during uncertain times. Although simple, cabbage and noodles offered more than nourishment. It represented the determination to keep family traditions alive despite financial hardship. Meals like this brought loved ones together around the table, proving that comfort did not always require expensive ingredients. As America's economy improved after the Depression, dinner tables gradually welcomed more meat, fresh vegetables, and elaborate casseroles. The once common bowl of cabbage and noodles slowly faded from everyday life, surviving mainly in family cookbooks and cultural celebrations. Today, this forgotten meal reminds us that some of the greatest comfort foods were born from necessity rather than luxury. A handful of noodles, a head of cabbage, and a little creativity once helped countless American families face another difficult day with strength, gratitude, and hope. Few meals stretched a family's food budget as effectively as a simple pot of bean soup. During the Great Depression, dried beans became one of the most dependable pantry staples because they were inexpensive, easy to store, and packed with nourishment. For countless Americans facing empty wallets and uncertain futures, this humble soup provided comfort one bowl at a time. The beauty of bean soup was its flexibility. Most recipes began with dried navy beans, pinto beans, or kidney beans soaked overnight before being simmered for hours with onions, carrots, celery, and whatever herbs or seasonings were available. If a family had a leftover ham bone or a small piece of salt pork, it added rich flavor to the broth. If not, the soup remained hearty enough to satisfy hungry stomachs with vegetables alone. A single pot could feed an entire household for several meals, making it especially valuable when every penny mattered. Parents often prepared large batches that could be reheated throughout the week, reducing both waste and cooking costs. Every spoonful represented careful planning and the determination to make limited supplies last as long as possible. Bean soup also became closely associated with community kitchens, churches, and charitable organizations that worked tirelessly to feed struggling families. It was inexpensive to prepare in large quantities and provided much-needed protein to people who rarely had meat on their plates. As prosperity returned after World War II, American diets gradually shifted toward more convenient canned foods, frozen dinners, and meat-centered meals. Although bean soup never disappeared completely, it slowly lost its place as an everyday necessity in many households. Today, this forgotten Depression-era favorite reminds us that true comfort does not always come from expensive ingredients. Sometimes, a handful of dried beans, a warm pot on the stove, and the hope of a better tomorrow were more than enough to keep an American family going. It may sound too simple to be called a meal today, but during the Great Depression, milk toast brought comfort to countless American families. With only a few inexpensive ingredients, it filled empty stomachs and offered a sense of warmth during days when many households struggled to afford even the most basic groceries. The recipe could not have been easier. Thick slices of bread were lightly toasted before being placed in a bowl or on a plate. Warm milk, often flavored with a little butter, sugar, or a pinch of salt, was poured over the toast until the bread softened. Some families sprinkled cinnamon or nutmeg on top whenever those spices were available, turning an ordinary breakfast into a small but welcome treat. Milk toast had existed long before the Great Depression, often served to children, the elderly, or anyone recovering from illness because it was gentle on the stomach. During the economic crisis, however, it became something much more important. It was an affordable meal that could be prepared quickly without wasting valuable ingredients, making it a dependable choice for families trying to stretch every dollar. For many children, waking up to a bowl of milk toast meant there would at least be breakfast before school. Parents appreciated that a loaf of bread and a bottle of milk could provide several nourishing meals while keeping grocery costs low during uncertain times. As prosperity returned and breakfast tables filled once again with eggs, bacon, cereals, and pancakes, milk toast quietly faded from everyday life. Younger generations often viewed it as old-fashioned, leaving it behind as American eating habits continued to evolve. Today, this forgotten Depression-era breakfast reminds us that comfort is not always found in elaborate recipes. Sometimes, the simplest combination of bread and warm milk carried enough hope to help families face another challenging day together. Creamed chipped beef on toast. To many Americans, it earned the unforgettable nickname SOS, but during the Great Depression, creamed chipped beef on toast was no laughing matter. It was an affordable, filling meal that helped countless families make the most of small amounts of preserved meat when fresh cuts were simply beyond their reach. The dish began with thin slices of dried chipped beef, a product that lasted far longer than fresh meat and could be stored without refrigeration. The beef was chopped into smaller pieces and stirred into a creamy white sauce made from butter, flour, and milk. Once the sauce thickened, it was poured generously over slices of toasted bread, creating a hearty meal from just a few inexpensive ingredients. For households carefully watching every penny, this recipe offered valuable protein without requiring expensive steaks or roasts. A single jar of chipped beef could flavor several meals, allowing families to stretch their food supplies while still enjoying something that felt richer than many other Depression-era dishes. The meal later became closely associated with military kitchens during World War II, where thousands of servicemen were served their own versions of creamed chipped beef on toast. That connection helped preserve the recipe for another generation, even as it slowly disappeared from ordinary family dinner tables. Children often remembered the creamy sauce soaking into crisp toast, while parents appreciated how quickly the meal could be prepared after a long day. It was simple comfort food that offered warmth and satisfaction when times remained uncertain. As refrigerators became common and fresh meat grew more affordable, preserved chipped beef gradually lost its importance in American kitchens. Today, this once familiar dish survives mainly through family memories, old community cookbooks, and military traditions, reminding us that even modest ingredients could create meals that brought comfort, nourishment, and hope during America's most difficult years. Oatmeal cake. A slice of homemade cake might seem like an ordinary dessert today, but during the Great Depression it felt like a small celebration. When expensive ingredients were difficult to afford, resourceful bakers discovered that humble oatmeal could help create a moist, flavorful cake that brought comfort to families without emptying their wallets. The recipe began with rolled oats soaked in hot water until they softened. The mixture was then combined with flour, brown sugar, spices, and just enough butter or shortening to form a rich batter. Many versions included cinnamon, nutmeg, or raisins when available, while a simple topping made from brown sugar, coconut, or chopped nuts added extra sweetness before the cake was baked until golden. Oatmeal cake became popular because oats were inexpensive, filling, and easy to keep in the pantry for long periods. Families who could not afford elaborate desserts still wanted something special for birthdays, church socials, or Sunday dinners. This cake proved that simple ingredients could produce remarkable results, offering a welcome break from the everyday struggle of stretching meals. For children, the warm aroma drifting through the kitchen often signaled one of the happiest moments of the week. Even a modest slice felt like a luxury during years when treats were rare. Parents found satisfaction in serving a homemade dessert that required more creativity than money. As the economy improved after the 1940s, grocery stores offered greater access to chocolate, fresh fruit, and richer baking ingredients. More elaborate cakes gradually replaced oatmeal-based recipes, and this once-beloved dessert quietly slipped from everyday American kitchens. Today, oatmeal cake survives in treasured family recipe boxes and community cookbooks. It reminds us that some of the sweetest memories were created not with expensive ingredients, but with imagination, perseverance, and the determination to make every family gathering feel a little more special. Depression cake. The final recipe on our list may have the saddest name of them all, but it also tells one of the most inspiring stories of American resilience. Depression cake, sometimes called war cake or crazy cake, was created when everyday baking ingredients became luxuries that many families simply could not afford. Yet somehow, home bakers still found a way to put cake on the table. Unlike traditional cakes, this remarkable dessert contained no eggs, no milk, and very little butter. Instead, bakers relied on flour, sugar, baking soda, vinegar, vegetable oil or shortening, cocoa powder, and water. The vinegar reacted with the baking soda to create a surprisingly light and tender texture, proving that creativity could often replace expensive ingredients. Some families stirred in raisins, cinnamon, or cloves whenever they had them, giving the cake extra flavor without increasing the cost. Depression cake quickly became a favorite because it allowed birthdays, holidays, and family gatherings to remain special despite difficult financial circumstances. Parents wanted their children to experience moments of happiness, even during years filled with uncertainty. A homemade cake, no matter how simple, reminded everyone that hope was still alive inside the home. When prosperity returned after World War II, supermarkets once again stocked fresh dairy products, eggs, and richer baking supplies. Traditional cakes reclaimed their place at celebrations, and depression cake slowly faded into family recipe boxes passed from one generation to the next. Today, this forgotten dessert is more than an old recipe. It stands as a lasting symbol of determination, resourcefulness, and the unbreakable spirit of families who refuse to let hardships steal their traditions. Every slice tells the story of people who discovered that even in the darkest times, kindness, love, and a little imagination could make life feel wonderfully sweet once again. The Great Depression left behind more than empty wallets. It left behind remarkable recipes that proved determination could overcome even the hardest times. While many of these meals have disappeared from family tables, their stories continue to remind us how ordinary people found hope through creativity, resilience, and the simple act of sharing food together. Which of these forgotten dishes surprised you the most, and did your parents or grandparents ever talk about any of them? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this journey into America's forgotten kitchens, subscribe for more lost recipes and nostalgic food stories from the past.